We shall commence this module by discussing the term macroeconomics. In this module, we will understand the issues studied under the branch of macroeconomics and what are the various schools of thoughts for macroeconomics. The British economist Alfred Marshall defined economics as the study of mankind in the ordinary business of life. It examines that part of individual and social action which is most closely connected with the attainment and with the use of the material requisites of the well-being. Macroeconomics concerns with the study of aggregate behavior in an economy, and it is policy oriented part of economics. According to Dornbusch and Fisher, the behavior of the economy as a whole, with booms and recessions, the economy's total output of goods and services and the growth of the output, the rate of inflation and unemployment, the balance of payments and the exchange rates. Macroeconomics deals with long run economic growth and with the short run fluctuations that constitutes the business cycle. Thus, the key concepts that are discussed under macroeconomics are aggregate price level, total output in the economy, employment and unemployment levels, levels of interest rate, wage rates and exchange rates, growth rate of output, inflation rates, recessions and booms, trade balance, fiscal and monetary policies and national debt. Thus, macroeconomics includes those essential lie in the interactions among the goods, labor and assets market of the economy and that lie in the interactions among the national economies whose residents trade with each other. After studying this module, you shall be able to know what is the concept of macroeconomics, know the importance of studying macroeconomics, identify the three central issues in macroeconomics, evaluate various schools of thoughts for the same. Let us now discuss the importance of macroeconomics. Macroeconomics is a branch of economics that carries significant value to any entity that is involved in trade and commerce. Macroeconomics principles allow the researchers and the other experts to predict a number of things related to economic markets and monetary policies. Thus, macroeconomics is necessary to understand the behavior of the entire economy as a whole. It is necessary to understand the mechanism which determines the price level and output in the entire economy, the employment and the unemployment rate, the trade balance and the foreign exchange reserves. Moreover, it is also necessary to have a special branch of macroeconomics other than the microeconomics, because what holds for an individual unit may not hold for the aggregate. For example, there is an increased demand for a good and an individual firm producing that good decides to produce more. This firm can produce more in the short run. However, if all the firms in an industry try to do so, it is not possible, at least not in the short run, because of the limited availability of resources like labor, capital, land and others. As a result, increased demand for goods will raise the price without increasing its output. Thus, what is true for an individual firm may not be true for an entire economy. Hence, there is a need to study macroeconomics as a separate branch of economics. Next, we shall discuss the central questions in macroeconomics. There are three central issues on macroeconomics which guide the study of macroeconomics as a separate branch of economics. Let us understand these one by one. First, how to explain and solve the problem of high and persistent unemployment in the economy. The unemployment rate is the number of jobless individuals who are actively looking for job or are on temporary layoff divided by the total of those employed and unemployed. Unemployment becomes a problem for an economy when it is high and persistent. There are evidences of high and chronic unemployment in many countries of the world. For example, during 1930s, unemployment rates were more than 20% for several years in US. United Kingdom and France suffered double-digit unemployment rate during 1980s and 1992 to 1993. According to Mankiw in 2009, each 1 point increase in the unemployment rate in an economy is associated with 920 more suicides, 650 more homicides, 4,000 more people admitted to state mental institutions, 3,300 more people sent to state prisons, 37,000 more deaths and increases in the domestic violence and homelessness. Thus, the research on macroeconomics focuses on finding the solutions for high and persistent unemployment. What are the theories behind unemployment? What are the factors that lead to high and chronic unemployment? How to tackle the problem of unemployment? What should government do as a part of their fiscal policy to solve the problem of unemployment? Is there any role for the central bank to play in order to curb the problem of unemployment? These are the various questions pertaining to unemployment that are answered in macroeconomics. Second, how to explain the problem of inflation? The inflation is the percentage rate of increase in the economy's average level of prices. There are evidences in United States that when average price level rise by more than 10% in 1979 and 1980. In Russia, price rises by more than 20% and sometimes even 30% in a month during 1992. In some Latin American countries, prices rise by more than 1000% per year in 1980s, leading to hyperinflation. Rising prices becomes even more severe problem for an economy when it is coupled with high unemployment rates. During the period of 1970 to 84, US economy has undergone a situation of high inflation and unemployment rate. Thus, macroeconomics studies the reasons why an economy faces period of high inflation rates and even hyperinflation. What are the ways to keep the inflation rate low without leading to a recession? What are the policy changes that are necessary to keep the inflation at the low levels coupled with the low unemployment rates? Third, how to explain an economic slowdown in an economy? In United States, growth rates in output declined to 2.8% during the period of 1970 to 1984, when there was a steady growth in output at 3.6% during the period of 1953 to 1969. Moreover, Japanese economy on an average grows at a higher rate than the US economy when income per person for Japan reaches the US levels only recently. So, the questions that arises are, why some economies grew at a higher rate than the others? What are the factors that lead to the higher growth in some economies while lower growth in the others? Is it because of the government investment in the infrastructure and technology that provides a boost to the economic growth, or is it something else? The study of macroeconomics provides the answers to these kinds of questions. It helps to understand the functioning of a complicated modern economic system, how the aggregate output, price level and unemployment are related in an economy. It analyzes the forces which determine the economic growth of a country and explains how to reach the highest state of economic growth and sustain it. It helps to bring stability in price level and analyzes the fluctuations in the business activities. It further explains the factors that determine the international trade, balance of payment crisis, fluctuations in the exchange rates and the business cycles. Moreover, it provides policy solutions, both fiscal and monetary policy solutions, to control the inflation and deflation, problem of unemployment, business cycles and low economic growth. Thus, macroeconomics helps us in understanding the above three questions and their answers, both theoretically as well as empirically. Unfortunately, there is no single answer to these questions. Different economists have their own viewpoints on the answers to these questions. As a result, macroeconomics has been divided into different schools of thoughts, starting from the classical schools of economics to the new Keynesian and the new growth theories. Moving on to discuss the schools of thoughts in macroeconomics. Among economists, there is no agreement on how the adjustment to equilibrium levels of output, prices and employment will take place. There are also differences on the views on the sources of economic fluctuations from the equilibrium. Basically, there are two important schools of thoughts in macroeconomics, and other schools of thought came up from the synthesis of these two schools of thoughts. These two schools are the classicals and the Keynesians. Later on, the debate on government intervention and role of central bank gained the importance, which gave rise to the monetarist school of thought. New synthesis came up, leading to the two new schools, the new classical school and the new Keynesians. Let us discuss these schools now. First is the classical approach. The term classical approach was coined by John Maynard Keynes to refer to the ideas presented by the economists prior to him, mainly by Adam Smith, David Ricardo, Thomas Malthus and John Stuart Mill. These economists believed that market and hence the economy operates on the notion of supply creates its own demand, the famous Say's law named after the economist J.B. Say. Classical economists view that prices, wages and interest rates are flexible such that the market always clear. There will be no excess demand or supply. There will be no unemployment and the growth will depend on the supply side factors. Classical economists believed in the dichotomy between the real and the monetary sectors of the economy, that is, due to the wage price flexibility, there is no role of money in the determination of output or income in the economy. Full employment will always exist without inflation. The mechanism behind the working of the economy towards full employment was an invisible hand. Any deviation from the full employment level of output will be corrected within the economy. There is minimum intervention by the government in maintaining the full employment level. Government's role is limited only to the maintenance of law and order and defense. They suggested that if there is laissez-faire system of trade, that is, if there is free trade among the countries, then the market forces will determine the output and income in the economy. Hence, the major view of the classical economist is a vertical aggregate supply curve where, due to the wage price flexibility, there is no change in the equilibrium level of income and output. If there is any change in the demand, wages and prices will adjust such that the full employment level of output will be maintained. For example, aggregate demand decreases from AD0 to AD1, creating excess supply at the prevailing price level of P0. Due to the wage price flexibility, wages will fall in the labour market and prices will fall in the goods market, bringing the output back to its employment level of Y0. Prices will fall to the new lower level of P1. Vertical aggregate supply curve by the classical economist. Any change in the aggregate demand changes the price level without changing the output and the income in the economy. Second is the Keynesian school of thought. Keynesian school of thought was evolved by John Maynard Keynes in the year 1936 with his book The General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money, which revolutionized the macroeconomics. It was after the Great Depression, which continued over a period of 1929 to 1933, that classical economists failed to explain the reason behind the high and persistent unemployment rates and declining output and income. It was at that time when Keynes proposed that the reason behind the Great Depression is the low aggregate demand in the economy, which further created low levels of income and high levels of unemployment. The concept of Keynesian economics was completely opposite to the classical economist. He came up with the notion of demand creates its own supply. Keynes argued that in the short run, wages and prices are rigid and do not adjust to the fluctuations in the aggregate demand. Wages are rigid due to the various labour market contracts and legislations. Thus, when aggregate demand falls, wages do not fall immediately and they are maintained at the higher levels only. Consequently, output declines and there is a recession. In the Keynesian economics, aggregate supply curve is assumed to be horizontal in the short run and vertical in the long run. Thus, Keynes believed that these kinds of business cycles can be managed by active government interventions through the fiscal policy, that is by spending more in recessions to stimulate demand, and by the monetary policy, that is by stimulating demand with the lower rates. Where aggregate supply curve in Keynesian economics in the short run is being represented, where an increase in the demand increases the output without any change in the price level due to the wage price rigidity. Next is the monetarist. Monetarist school of thought evolved after the Nobel Prize winner Milton Friedman, who argued that in the Keynesian model there is no role of money. He emphasized the role of money supply and the monetary policy in the determination of output and income in the economy. The basis of monetarist was the Keynesian school of thought, and it paved the way of new classical school of thought. Neoclassical school of thought. In response to Keynesian economist and monetarist, the neoclassical economists like John Hicks, Paul Samuelson and Robert Solow synthesizes the work of Keynesian and classical economists. The revolutionary work was done by Sir John Hicks, who came up with the ISLM model, which integrated the classical and the Keynesian ideas on the real and nominal macroeconomic variables. The neoclassical growth model by Robert Solow, known as the Solow model, helped in studying the long run growth trajectory of an economy and the attainment of the steady state level of growth. Another is the new classical school of thought. The new classical school of thought is built largely on the new classical school. The new classical school emphasizes the importance of microeconomics and models based on that behavior. Economists like Robert Lucas, Thomas Sargent, Robert Barrow, Edward Prescott and Neil Wallace characterize this school of thought. They believed with the notion of rational expectations, that is, economic agents act rationally in their own self-interest to maximize their welfare or profits. They endorsed the wage price flexibility assumption and hence believed that market will always clear. The two main issues that are usually discussed in new classical school are rational expectations and real business cycles. Rational expectation hypothesis given by Robert Lucas modeled the agents as the rational and forward looking. Any policy change will be ineffective, that is, economic agents would anticipate inflation and adjust to higher price level before the start of the monetary expansion that could boost employment and output. Only unanticipated monetary policy could increase the employment, and no central bank could systematically use the monetary policy for the expansion without economic agents catching on and anticipating price changes before they could have a simulative impact. Real business cycle theory, known as RBC theory, assumes that business cycle fluctuations can be accounted for by real shocks rather than the nominal shocks. RBC theory sees business cycle fluctuations as an efficient tool in response to the exogenous changes in the real economic variables. They do not represent a failure to market clearance, but the best solution to the structure of the economy. They reject the Keynesian views of government intervention to smoothen out the economic short-term fluctuations and argued that government should concentrate on the long-run structural policy changes. New Keynesian school of thought. The new Keynesian school attempts to add microeconomic foundations to the traditional Keynesian economic theories. This school of thought includes the economists like George Akerlof, David Romer, Oliver Blanchard and Grew Mankiw. They do not believe that the markets clear, but explain why the market failed to clear. They argue that wages and prices are neither rigid nor flexible. They adjust slowly to the shocks. Due to the menu cost, aggregate demand externalities and coordination failure, wages and prices adjust slowly and even sometimes sticky. Menu costs are the cost to the firm for changing the prices and wages. If it is costly for the firm to change the prices they charge and the wages they pay, both wages and prices will adjust slowly. Hence, economy-wide wage level and price level will not be flexible to adjust to the period of shocks. Aggregate demand externalities include the impact of one firm's price change on the demand for all other firms' product. When one firm lowers the price it charges, it lowers the economy-wide average price level, raising the real money balances, and hence the demand for other firms rises. Thus, it is a positive externality to the other firms, and hence they are reluctant to reduce their prices, making the prices and wages sticky. The problem of coordination failure arises because the leaders who set the prices are unable to anticipate the actions of the other firms. Similarly, labor unions which set the wages are unable to see the benefits to the other labor unions. As a result, leaders fail to come to an inferior outcome over a preferred outcome, making the economy-wide average price level and wages sticky. Next, we will discuss the new growth theories. Beginning in the mid-1980s, many macroeconomists started thinking about long-run new growth theories. They were concerned about why sub-Saharan Africa failed to catch up in terms of growth and why the East Asian tigers emerge as the booming countries in the world in terms of high growth rates. Thus, they came up with endogenous growth models, which includes technological progress and knowledge spillovers, role of innovation and protection of this innovation through patents, and the role of human capital formation in the growth process. This theory emphasized that an economy can experience high growth rate with the development or imports of technology and innovative ideas for growth. History of a nation does not matter in the growth process. The simplest of these models is the AK model of endogenous growth. Lastly, we will discuss the new synthesis. New synthesis or new neoclassical synthesis emerges in the 1990s. It is a combination of both new Keynesian and new classical schools. It adapts the real business cycle theories and rational expectation hypothesis from the new classical school, while it adapts the nominal rigidities, price stickiness and market imperfections from the new Keynesian school. Thus, new synthesis theory develops the dynamic stochastic general equilibrium known as DSGE models. DSGE models formulate hypotheses about the behavior and preferences of the firms and households. These models also include a stochastic element created by the shocks to the economy. Now we will summarize what we have discussed in this module. Macroeconomics is a study of aggregate behavior in the economy. The three central issues of macroeconomics are high and persistent unemployment, high inflation rates and economic slowdown. Topics that are studied in macroeconomics are employment, unemployment, inflation, GDP growth, real versus nominal variables, business cycles, aggregate demand and aggregate supply. There are various schools of thoughts in the macroeconomics, starting from classical approach to the new synthesis theories. Though there are controversies among these theories, yet they provide useful insights into the branch of macroeconomics.